So, the City of New Westminster has a proposed budget for 2026, and you know what? It's going to affect every single resident. The real questions are, where is your money going, and how much more are you going to be paying? In this explainer, we're going to break down that one big number and show you exactly how the city got there.
All right, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. The number that matters most to you, the resident, is a proposed 4.6% property tax increase for 2026. Now, that's the headline, but the real story, the interesting part, is how we even get to that number in the first place.
So, yeah, that's the big question for today, isn't it? How in the world does the city land on a 4.6% increase? We're going to build the answer for you step by step.
First things first. Let's talk about the absolute basics. This is the money that's needed just to maintain the city services we already have. You can think of it as just the cost of keeping the lights on and making sure things run the way they do right now. Now, the official term is non-discretionary baseline increases, which I know sounds super complicated, but it's really not. Honestly, it's just like your own household budget. Your rent or mortgage goes up, groceries cost more because of inflation, your bills get higher. Well, the city faces the exact same pressures for things like employee wages and the rising price of everything it means to buy. And here's what that actually costs. Just to cover those essentials, to basically stand still, we're already at a 3.2% increase. That's a huge takeaway right there. Most of the proposed tax hike is just to keep services at the exact same level they are today. Okay, so if 3.2% is just for keeping the lights on, what about the rest of it? Where does that come from? Well, let's move on and see how this whole thing builds by looking at the new investments and service upgrades that are being proposed. The first major area of new spending is public safety. The New Westminster Police Board has come forward with several recommendations aimed at improving service and tackling some key safety concerns in the community. So this includes funding to get more patrols out there, improve training for officers, and transition the gang suppression unit. Put it all together, and these initiatives add another 0.8% to the tax increase. Next up, community grants. Following a motion from City Council, the budget is proposing a pretty significant funding boost for all those local organizations that do so much to serve our community. And to make that happen, to get that 50% increase in the community grants envelope, a 0.4% tax implication is needed. You can think of this as a direct investment into the city's nonprofit and community backbone.
The budget also has some other enhancements that Council is supporting. These are really focused on two of the city's biggest priorities right now. You guessed it, housing challenges and trying to build a stronger sense of community belonging for everyone.
The tax impact for these specific initiatives is actually pretty small, all things considered. It comes in at just 0.2%.
All right, the final piece of this new spending puzzle is all about strategic investments for the future. This is the long game stuff, making sure infrastructure is solid and that the city itself is running as well as it possibly can.
These investments are all about supporting the city's long-term plan, and they add a full 1.0% to the tax increase. This covers things like asset management, which is really just a fancy way of saying having a plan to repair and replace our roads and pipes before they fail, and just generally improving how the city operates day to day. So we've seen all the different pieces that are adding to the tax rate, but how do they all fit together to get us to that final 4.6% number? Let's look at the complete picture.
This table really puts it all together nicely. Let's just focus on that bottom row. We start with that 3.2% baseline cost, right? Then, the city subtracts 1% through savings and new revenue. After that, we start adding back all those new investments we just talked about, the 0.4 for grants, 0.8 for police, 0.2 for council initiatives, and that 1.0 for strategic investments. And voila, that's exactly how we land at 4.6%.
You know, it's also really important to remember that property taxes are only one piece of the pie. There are other major funding sources that help pay for all these services and new ideas. In fact, $8.2 million of the budget is covered by sources that are not property taxes. We're talking about money from city reserves, grants from the provincial or federal government, and revenue that comes from all the new development happening around the city. Okay, so we understand the number for this year, but how does it really compare to previous years and the economy in general? Let's zoom out for a second and put this 4.6% figure into a bit of context. These charts tell a really fascinating story. It's basically a story about catching up. For several years, if you look at the dark blue line, you'll see that property tax increases have actually been lagging behind the rising costs of things like construction and wages.
Now we're seeing a convergence, where tax increases are finally starting to reflect those real-world inflationary pressures.
And that story is summed up perfectly by this quote right from the city's report. It highlights a converging pattern where property taxes are, and I'm quoting here, essentially catching up to the real-world cost increases the city has been dealing with for the last few years.
All right, we've talked about percentages, we've talked about economic trends, but let's bring this all down to the most practical level. What does this proposed increase actually mean for your wallet?
Here it is, the bottom line. For every $100,000 of assessed value on a residential property, the proposed increase works out to an extra $13 per year. For business and other types of properties, that figure is $40 per $100,000 of assessed value.
So there you have it, a 4.6% increase. It's largely to maintain the services we have now, but it's also funding some really targeted investments in public safety, community support, and the city's future. This budget proposes a path forward. And the question it leaves for every single resident is this: does this path align with your vision for New Westminster?